Joe knows taxes.
Joe knows the market.
Joe knows Social Security.
Joe knows income planning.
Joe knows pickleball? No.
This is Joe Knows Retirement.
Medicaid Asset Protection Trust. That's what we're going to be talking about today. This is a fun topic. This is one that I would say a lot of people aren't aware of, or it's probably one of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to financial planning. Now, when I actually got into the industry years ago, I actually thought a Medicaid Protection Trust was a bad thing because I was not fully educated on what it was. And then I had an estate planning attorney really educate me on the benefits of it, but really more so showed me, hey, here's who it's right for and here's who it's not right for. And because of that, I am now a believer that a Medicaid Protection Trust can make sense for the right person. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. And so if your goal is long-term care planning, your goal is, hey, I want to make sure I can leave as much assets to my beneficiaries. I'm concerned about a huge healthcare, need or needing a long-term care facility, then this video is going to be for you. And if you have a lot of non-qualified type investments that you are looking to try to protect, then this could be a good video for you to watch. And so what we really look at here with this Medicaid Protection Trust is, how do we get your assets out of your estate so that you can be eligible for what's called Medicaid Planning? And so Medicaid is a government-funded assistance program for those who I will call poor. And so if you're able to show that you have basically no assets, then the government will come in and say, here's some money for long-term care if you can prove that you need it. And so the idea of this is that if you have a lot of assets, well, the government's not going to come in. They're going to make you spend down all of your assets before they're going to come in to help you. And so that's why we look at this trust, is because we can actually take your assets, put it into this type of trust, and then you're able to show the IRS, the government, that you have no assets, even though you can still have access to those funds if you set it up the right way. And that's the key. You have to set this up the right way. And so there's different types of trusts out there. There's revocable trust and there's irrevocable trust. And you'll actually want to set this up as an irrevocable trust. And now let me back up a little bit and say, you'll want to set this up. I would not recommend you set this up. I would recommend you work with an estate planning attorney, specifically one specializing in elder law, because that's going to be the people who do this more times than not and know the ins and outs and know how to set up the right way so you don't make a wrong mistake is ultimately the goal here. And so for us, we have an attorney here that we work with in-house that meets with our clients, and then he's an expert in this. He can do it if he feels that is best for the client to do that. And also understand, I want to backtrack, this is not right for everyone. We would say that for most people that we work with, the crowd that we work with, that millionaire next door, that diligent saver, typically only about 30 or 40% of them actually need trust. So again, understand this isn't for everyone, but it can be a viable option for those that are looking for this type of planning. And it's just another reminder that financial planning is not cookie cutter. One thing is not for everyone. This is just one tool in the toolbox that can make sense for specific people there. So then let me go back to the concept of this is an irrevocable trust. Now, when you think of irrevocable, you think of I never have access to it, I'm tying it up, I can't ever touch it. Well, that is technically true, but if you set this up the right way and you have the right provisions in place, you can actually still access this trust to use it while you're living, but still be able to be eligible for Medicaid planning if you were to need that. And so that's one of the keys that we see for this. Now, let's talk about who this trust is not for. Well, if you have all your assets in just an IRA or, and that's really where the premier set of assets are, maybe this is less needed for you. But if you start to have more non-qualified assets that the government can come take from you, then that's where it can make sense to put these non-qualified assets into this trust. If you have a lot of real estate, if you have investment accounts that are not on retirement accounts, if you have a lot of just vehicles that are highly appreciated, that are a lot of value. And so typically when we see people with about $250,000 or $500,000 or more in those types of accounts is where this type of planning could start to make sense. And so that's where you'd want to start looking at it. If you don't have as much, maybe not something you have to worry about. And then the other thing you have to worry about is something called the 5-year rule. Now this is different in different states. I'm just going to talk about what it is here in Ohio. So it's important for you to go look for your specific state to see what that rule is actually, because there's some states that's 7, 10 years, some are longer than 5 years, but this is what we call the look back period. Now let's say you do this and you say, Joe, this is a great video, I want to go do this. Well, if you go set the trust up tomorrow and you need a long-term care stay tomorrow as well, this trust is not going to technically be in service for you, because you have to have it in place for at least 5 years. You have to gift the assets out of your estate for at least 5 years before they can claw it back, right? So if you have it for 5 years, they can't claw it back. But if you only have it there for 2 years and then you need long-term care, well, they can come they can come after those assets that you've already given away. And so another set of idea or planning items that we could see people do if they don't want to go set up a trust is you could just start gifting your money to your kids or beneficiaries and starting to get it out of your estate that way too. But that 5-year rule would still apply to that as well. And so those are two ideas, but we do have to worry about this clawback. And so that's why it's important to be proactive and plan for that now. Now, if you ask me, I'm going to tell you that I think that look back period is probably going to go higher and higher, because I think the government wants more of your money, not less. And so by making that higher and higher, this is going to make this type of strategy less advantageous for people. And so it's almost a loophole right now that you can do to get ahead of things, but I'm sure they're not going to make it good or great forever. And so that's just something you have to be looking out for and be aware of. The other concern that I really want to make known here is just make sure you're working with an estate planning attorney that you can trust. Now, this is probably going to be one of the more expensive options that estate planning attorneys will offer. And so because of that, you can imagine that some attorneys, this will be the most oversold product or tool that they do, because that's where they make the most money. And I'm not saying that is right by any means, but I'm telling you it is true. And so that's why we had the idea of bringing an attorney in-house to deal with this with our clients, is because we don't want to worry about sending them down the street to an attorney that's going to sell them something they don't need. Maybe they're not even trying to, but maybe it's just because they don't understand their situation. And so it's important for us that we understand our entire client situation before we direct them over to the estate planning attorney in order to actually document or build those legal documents for them is extremely important. You don't want to do something that you don't need. Not everyone needs a trust. Trust can be more expensive. Now, if you're looking for this type of trust on the marketplace, typical cost is going to be probably around $7,000 to about $12,000, depending on where you go and how you have it done. And we typically see about the average is probably about $8,000 to give you a more ballpark number there. The great thing with our clients is our clients, I believe they only pay about, it's like $4,000 or less. I think they pay less than $4,000 since we don't take a referral fee from our attorney. But just understand that it's going to cost some money to get this type of planning done. And so I'll actually tell you a story about this that's actually really applicable. Is before we had the attorney that meets with our clients at our office, we used to send clients to different attorneys. Well, this client went to an estate planning attorney's dinner workshop. And if you know anything about those dinner workshops that you probably get mailers on, they're just trying to sell things for the most part. And so for him, he was told, hey, you need to do this trust. It's going to cost $7,000. It's everything you need. It's got all these bells and whistles. It's awesome. And the client was like, man, this is pretty cool. And I'd agree with him. It was pretty cool structure because it's what we're talking about today. But when the client called us and said, hey, why have you not talked about this? And I simply told him, because you don't need it. For your situation, it doesn't make sense for you to have this type of trust. And so I'm saying you can go get it. It's not going to hurt you, but you are going to be out $7,000 for something you don't truly need. And so he came in with his spouse, met with our attorney. They walked out of the door paying $750 with everything they needed from an estate planning document standpoint. And so you just have to understand that maybe you don't need this level of sophistication within your plan. But if you do, it can make a lot of sense. And so again, just make sure you're doing your research, make sure you're working with the right team to do this for you. And I'd recommend you work with an advisor team. And I hope your financial planner has an attorney there that they're working closely with, they're collaborating, and they're actually sitting in on those meetings with you, with that estate planning attorney, to make sure you get the right things. That's what we do for our clients. We feel like that's what you need to do to go that extra mile for your clients. So that's something that I would recommend there as well. Now, the other thing that I want to keep in mind here is that, we've talked about Medicaid planning this entire video, but I also want to make introduction to something called the estate tax. Now, the estate tax is something for the ultra wealthy right now. And so the estate tax limit, if you're married, it could be over $30 million. So if you have $30 million or more, then you need to be worrying about the estate tax. If you're single, it's about $15 million, right? Well, that is true today, but what do you think is going to happen to the estate tax limits over time? Well, if you know what's going to happen in 2026, they're going to be cut in half. Now, those are still really high limits, but if you go back in history and you go all the way back to, the 80s, 90s, 2000s, you can see that limit was down to $600,000. It was down to $1 million, meaning that if you had over $1 million, you would have to pay a 40% tax in addition to your federal taxes. And so I've actually done an estate tax planning video that you can go watch. Just look up there and click on that link that really explains estate taxes a little more in depth. But this is something that if you have $3 million or more, or around that number, especially if you have more, you have to keep this on your mind. Now, I'm not telling you to go out and plan for it today if you have less than 20 or 30 million, but I am telling you that be aware of rule changes, and this type of trust could be good for you when that time comes. But remember that look back period, right? And so that's why it can make sense to set it up now, get ahead of things in case they change that look back period, or, and more importantly, if you expect them to change the rules and you're going to be impacted, that's where it could make sense. And so that's why we really want to introduce it to people like you, that this type of trust can be used for a dual-edged sword, not only for Medicaid planning, but also to help you prevent estate taxes. And now we met with a guy the other day, and he had about a $9 million net worth. And I asked him, I said, what do you expect this to be when you pass away? And, he proudly said, probably about 20 million. If it's 20 million, I feel pretty good. I feel like I've had a pretty successful, saving and retirement, and, I feel good about that. I said, okay, what do you expect estate taxes to be in the future is what I asked him. He goes, oh, I don't know. I could expect them to go around really low, considering that the IRS wants to tax the wealthy, right? And by the way, if you have over $1 million, you're considered wealthy. You're in the top 10% in the entire country. And so in my mind, those are the people they're coming after. And so for his case, he expected a estate tax. Let's just say it was 10 million is what he said. I said, okay, state tax is 10 million. That's the limit. So anything, if you have 10 million or less, you pay no estate tax. But if you have 10 million, anything above that is going to be taxed at a 40% level just for estate tax. And so I was like, if you're at 10 million and you need 20, or you're going to have 20, well, you have to pay estate tax on $10 million. That means that he would see $4 million of that go to the government because of poor planning. Now, is that actually an applicable story, a real story? We don't know. Tax code's written in pencil. They can change it however they want. But if that were true, that's the impact of how significant estate tax can be. And so I don't know if you want the government to be the beneficiary of your money, or you want your beneficiaries to be the beneficiary of your money, that you actually get to choose and you want to do so. And that's not even in addition to federal taxes, which at that point, your kids taking out an IRA, for example, over 10 years, well, they may be paying 40% tax, 50% tax at that time anyways above that. So you can see that this can be a significant decrease to your total assets in the future. And again, an irrevocable trust, getting it out of your estate, now they can't say that that is part of your estate, and now your estate tax amount is lowered, and that's ultimately the idea. So for those main reasons, there is why you want to consider this type of trust. If you have specific questions about this type of trust, feel free to schedule a time with our team here. We can talk further about what it looks like to work with us, and we could potentially help you set this, or tell you, hey, maybe this isn't what you need, depending on your situation. So with that being said, enjoy the rest of your day, and make sure you do better planning moving forward so you can live the retirement that you dream of.
Since we do not know your specific situation, none of this information can serve as tax, legal, insurance, or financial advice, and may be outdated or inaccurate. The information comes from sources believed to be reliable but cannot be guaranteed. This content is prepared for educational purposes only. If you need advice, please contact a qualified CPA, attorney, insurance agent, financial advisor, or the appropriate professional for the subject you would like help with. Peak Retirement Planning, Inc. is an Ohio-based registered investment advisor and able to offer advisory services in Ohio and in other states where registered or exempt from registration.